The moment Aaron saw her face on that screen, he went completely still. He had been sitting in his home office, half-heartedly flipping through channels after a long day, a glass of bourbon balanced on his knee. The TV was background noise. It had been background noise for 2 years, and then the camera cut to her, composed, shoulders back, wearing a cream blazer he had never seen before. And the news anchor said her name like it meant something. Joining us tonight is Renée Cole, founder and creative director of Thread and Bone, whose textile studio was just named one of the top 20 women-led small businesses in the state. Renée, welcome. Aaron sat forward so fast the bourbon nearly went over. The glass rocked. He caught it. His eyes didn't leave the screen. She was smiling. Not the careful, apologetic smile he remembered. Something else entirely. 3 years earlier, Renée had believed with her whole body that she was building something real. She and Aaron had met in their mid-20s at a friend's dinner party, the kind where everyone was crowded around a too-small table and passing wine bottles hand to hand. He was funny. He remembered details. On their third date, he brought her a book she had mentioned in passing on their first, and she thought, this man pays attention. She was 30 when they married. She was 32 when she first noticed that the man who used to pay attention had stopped looking at her altogether. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part no one tells you. It happens the way water carves stone. So slowly you don't feel it happening. You just look down one day and realize there is less of you than there used to be. She had been a textile artist before they married, freelancing, taking commissions, selling her woven pieces at local markets on weekends. It wasn't glamorous. It paid inconsistently. Aaron was an architect with a steady salary, and when they married it seemed to make sense. The way a lot of things seemed to make sense in those early years, to lean on his income and let her work become secondary. She told herself it was temporary. She'd pick it back up when things settled. She kept all her equipment in the second bedroom, the loom, the boxes of yarn, the notebooks full of color studies, and sometimes she'd sit in there for an hour on a Sunday afternoon just to feel like herself. But the hours got shorter. The visits got less frequent. Life filled in around the edges until the second bedroom was just a room full of her old things. Aaron didn't ask her to stop. He never said put that away or this isn't practical. What he said was subtler and, she would later understand, more damaging. He'd look at something she'd made and say, cute, in a tone that meant he'd already moved on. When she mentioned a commission at dinner, he'd nod and redirect. When she said she was thinking of taking a workshop, he said, without looking up, you know we're trying to save money. And she would fold the idea away like a piece of paper and tell herself, later. Next year. When things are different. She stopped going to the studio room, altogether around year 2 of their marriage. She told herself it was because she was busy helping manage their finances, cooking, keeping the house running the way Aaron liked it, organized, quiet, predictable. She contributed her freelance earnings, the small ones, to a shared account he managed. She had no separate savings. It didn't seem like something she needed. Her mother, June, had her doubts from the beginning. Not about Renée, never about Renée. About the arrangement. You're a grown woman with a talent, June said once over the phone, in that even voice she used when she was trying not to push. I just want to make sure it's not getting buried. Mom, I'm fine. I know you're fine. I just said what I said. June was 61, a retired schoolteacher from outside Savannah who still had her garden and her morning walks, and a way of looking at things that cut straight to the center. She had given Renée, when she turned 25, a small wooden chest, the kind with a brass clasp, that had belonged to her own mother. Inside it was a collection of hand-dyed fabric swatches, silk and cotton and linen, in colors Renée had never seen anywhere else. A dusty rose that edged toward rust, a green that was almost gray, a blue so deep it looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of something. These are hers, June had said. She never got to do anything with them. You do something with them. Renée kept the chest in the studio room. After she stopped going in there, she'd sometimes stand in the doorway and look at it on the shelf and feel something she couldn't name. Not quite guilt. Not quite grief. Something in between. The marriage ended the way it began. Not all at once. Renée found the emails in March, 3 years in, when she was looking for a restaurant receipt Aaron had asked her to track down. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't suspicious. She found what she found the way you find things that were never meant to stay hidden. One careless click, one folder left open. She sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes reading. Her coffee went cold. Her hands didn't shake. She just read until there was nothing left to read. When Aaron came home, she was still sitting there. He didn't deny it. She gave him credit for that. Later, in the complicated accounting of things she could and couldn't be grateful for, he sat across from her and admitted it, and then, almost immediately, pivoted to a kind of defensive exhaustion, as if the effort of confessing had already depleted his obligation to feel bad. You have to understand, Renee. I haven't felt connected to you in a long time. She looked at him. You stopped connecting. That's different. He was quiet. I gave up my work for this, she said. Not an accusation. Just a fact placed on the table between them. I put everything into this house. Into you. I never asked you to do that. And there it was. The thing she'd replay at 2 a.m. for months afterward. I never asked you to. As if the slow accumulation of 1,000 small discouragements hadn't amounted to asking. As if the architecture of their life hadn't been built to accommodate him and hollow her out. The divorce was quick because she had nothing to fight for. That was the brutal efficiency of it. The house was in his name. They'd bought it when she was barely freelancing, and the mortgage required his income alone. The savings account was his. Her name was on a joint checking account, with a balance that wouldn't last 3 months. She had no career to return to, no recent portfolio, no contacts who still thought of her as working. She had her car, her clothes, the boxes of her old textile equipment, and the small wooden chest from her grandmother. She didn't fight. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was 33 years old, and so profoundly exhausted by the version of herself she'd become inside that marriage that she just wanted out. She would have the rest of her life to figure out what came next. She needed to be standing on different ground first. She drove to her mother's house in Savannah with everything that fit in her car. June opened the door before Renee could knock. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say anything for a moment. She just put her arms around her daughter and held on, and Renee, who had not cried once in the 2 weeks since the confrontation, not once, not in front of anyone, pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and came completely undone. "I don't know what I have left," she said into the fabric of June's cardigan. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." "Right now," June said, "you're supposed to come inside and eat something." She stayed for 6 weeks. She slept in her old room, which still smelled faintly of the cedar sachets her mother kept in every closet. She helped in the garden. She went on walks. She sat at the kitchen table while June graded papers she'd volunteered to help the local elementary school with. Even in retirement, and Renee thought, this woman has never once stopped doing what she loves. It wasn't a criticism of herself. It was more like a compass point she'd lost and was slowly finding again. On the 4th week, she dragged the wooden chest out of her car, where it had been sitting under a blanket in the trunk. She carried it to the back porch and opened it in the afternoon light. The swatches were exactly as she remembered. The dusty rose, the deep blue, the gray-green she'd never found a match for anywhere. She sat with them for a long time. Then she went inside and asked her mother if she still had the old wooden frame loom she'd kept in the garage since Renee was a child. June looked at her, just looked, steady and without surprise, and said, "Third shelf on the left." She started with small things, placemats, a table runner. She wasn't trying to build anything. She was just trying to remember how her hands worked. But her hands remembered faster than she expected. By week 6, she had made 4 pieces she didn't hate. One of them she thought was genuinely good. She photographed them on June's back porch in the golden hour light and posted them, with no caption, to an Instagram account she had mostly abandoned 2 years ago. She got 14 messages in 2 days. 3 of them were from strangers who wanted to know if the pieces were for sale. She drove back to Atlanta not because she was ready, but because readiness, she had decided, was a thing she could no longer afford to wait for. She found a room in a shared house, 4 other women, all of them navigating various versions of starting over, and she took a part-time job at a framing shop 3 days a week. The pay was not impressive. The owner, a woman in her late 50s named Harriet, no, wait, she stopped herself. She'd used that name before in a different context. The owner's name was Willa. Small, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who seemed to be permanently evaluating whether you were worth her time. On Renee's first day, Willa watched her handle a piece of antique silk fabric they were framing for a client, watched the way Renee's fingers moved and said, "You know textiles. I used to work with them. Used to. I'm starting again." Willa nodded slowly, like she was filing this information away. She handed Renee the next piece to mount and didn't say anything else. 3 weeks later, Willa asked if she wanted to use the shop's back storage room on weekends. It was empty. It had good light. It wasn't charity. Willa made clear she expected Renee to help reorganize the inventory room in exchange. But it was space. It was a place to work that wasn't her bedroom. Renee said yes before Willa finished the offer. The months that followed were not a montage. That's the thing about rebuilding. It doesn't feel triumphant while it's happening. It feels like waking up tired and doing it anyway. It feels like doing the math again and again, and the math never quite working, but working enough. It feels like eating the same 3 cheap meals on rotation, because you've decided to spend what little extra you have on materials, on a better secondhand loom, on a silk dyeing workshop you found listed on a community art center's website. She took the workshop. There were 8 other people in the room, ages ranging from what looked like 19 to somewhere north of 70. The instructor was a woman named Dorothea, who wore her gray hair in a long braid, and spoke about color the way other people speak about music, like it had rhythm and pitch and emotional consequence. Renée sat in the front. She took notes. She asked questions she'd been holding for years. Afterward, Dorothea stopped her by the door. "You've done this before. A long time ago." I stepped away. "Well." Dorothea handed her a business card. Not for herself, but for a craft collective across town. "They have studio space. Tell them I sent you." The collective was called The Yard. It occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse, shared by 8 or 9 artists in different disciplines, a ceramicist, 2 painters, a bookbinder, a jewelry maker, and, as of a Tuesday morning in October, when Renée knocked on the door with Dorothea's card in her hand, a textile artist who was just finding her feet again. The member who let her in was named Bram. He was in his late 40s, soft-spoken, the kind of person who listened when you talked and didn't fill silence out of discomfort. He showed her the studio spaces, the shared equipment room, the kitchen where people left homemade things on the counter on Friday afternoons. He showed her the empty corner space that had been vacated 2 months ago and hadn't been filled. The monthly membership fee was modest. It was still more than she had budgeted for. She did the math twice on the train home. Then she called her mother. "Join it," June said. "I can't really afford, Renée. Join it." She joined it. The first piece she made in the Yard studio space took 3 weeks. She was working around her hours at the framing shop, coming in on evenings and weekend mornings, sometimes arriving before anyone else, and sitting in the quiet of the empty building while the light was still low. She was building a wall hanging, large scale, something she hadn't attempted since before her marriage. The colors were anchored by her grandmother's swatches, the deep blue as the base, the gray-green threading through. She was doing something with texture she'd never tried before, layering techniques she'd learned separately over the years and had never had space to put together. Bram saw it when she was 2/3 finished. He stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, and then he said, "This is the kind of thing that should be shown. It's not done." "I know, I'm saying when it is." She finished it on a Friday night. She photographed it in the morning light the next day and posted it, this time with a description, a price, and a note that she was accepting commissions. It sold within the week. The buyer was a corporate interior designer who wanted to know if she did large format work for commercial spaces. She said she did. She went home and figured out how. Within 6 months, she had a wait list. Within a year, she had moved out of the shared house into a small apartment of her own, the first space that had been entirely, uncomplicatedly hers since before her marriage. She put her grandmother's chest on the windowsill in the living room. She left it open. She hired her first part-time assistant, a textile student named Kala who was fast and detail-oriented and didn't need much direction. She started tracking her finances with a meticulousness she had never bothered with before. Not because she was anxious, but because she had learned, in a way she'd been too comfortable to learn before, that your financial life is your life. She had her own accounts. She understood what was in them. She made decisions about them without consulting anyone. She had a name by now, Thread and Bone. She'd landed on it at the Yard one evening when she was trying to describe to Bram what her work was about, the way textiles held the tension between softness and structure, between what gives and what holds. Thread and bone, she'd said, almost to herself. He'd looked at her. That's it. She registered it the following week. The state business recognition came as a surprise, or at least the scale of it did. She'd applied for a small arts grant the previous spring. Bram had encouraged her, walked her through the application, and somewhere in the follow-up process, she'd been flagged for a broader entrepreneurship program. She answered their questions. She went to one meeting, then another. She didn't think much about it. She was too busy working. The news segment was the program's idea, not hers. They wanted to profile several of the honorees. She agreed because it seemed like good exposure for the business. Spent 20 minutes the morning of the interview deciding what to wear, and sat under the studio lights, thinking mostly about the commissioned piece she needed to finish by the end of the week. Aaron saw it by accident. He'd been flipping channels. This detail she would learn later, from a mutual friend who told her without realizing they were handing her something she'd think about for a long time. He'd been flipping channels after a long day, and there she was. She didn't know about any of this the night it aired. She was at the yard when the segment ran, finishing the piece she'd been thinking about under the studio lights. She got a call from her mother during the drive home. "I just watched you on television," June said. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite composure. "Mom, were you crying?" "I'm just saying I watched you. It was fine, it was just a short, Renee." Her mother's voice went quiet. "Steady. I watched you tell that woman about starting over, and I want you to know your grandmother would have known exactly what to say right now. But I'm just going to say, I'm glad. I'm so glad." Renee pulled over, not because she had to, she was almost home. She just needed to stop moving for a second. "I almost didn't do it," she said. Not the interview. She meant all of it, the workshop, the yard, the commission, the name. "There were so many moments where I almost just stopped." "I know," June said, "but you didn't." She sat with that for a moment. "The chest is on my windowsill," she said. "I keep it open." She heard her mother exhale. "Good," June said softly. "Good." 3 months after the segment aired, Aaron reached out. A single message, sent through a platform she barely used, the kind of message she could tell had been written and rewritten. He'd seen her on TV. He was glad she was doing well. If she was ever in the area. She read it once. She put her phone down. She picked it up again, not to respond, but to check the wait list for Thread and Bone. 4 new inquiries had come in overnight. One of them was a hotel group looking for original textile installations for a new property they were opening in the spring. She set the phone down again and looked at the wooden chest on her windowsill, open in the morning light. Her grandmother's colors arranged against the white sill, like something still unfinished, still full of what they could become. She opened her laptop. She started writing back to the hotel.